Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. My name is Belinda from the New Blue Party of Ontario and MPP candidate for re-election for the riding of Cambridge. The New Blue Party of Ontario was formed in October of 2020 after I was removed from the Doug Ford PC caucus for voting against the Reopening Ontario Act, otherwise known as the Lockdown Bill, which gave the Ford PCs emergency powers without there being a state of emergency and without any vote or debate from any MPPs in the Ontario legislature. In January of 2021, the New Blue Party became an official party with Elections Ontario, and we were the first party to have a full slate of 124 candidates to run in the upcoming June 2nd election. And I am so honored to have 12 of those candidates join us here today. Thank you all so much for stepping up. The last 4 years have been a huge disappointment, both for Ontarians who voted for the Ford PCs back in 2018 and those who do not. They introduced an industrial carbon tax when they said they would get rid of a carbon tax. The cost of living has skyrocketed under the PC party. They did not lower taxes. In fact, taxes went up because of their industrial carbon tax. They withheld early treatment for COVID-19 and failed to protect those who are at risk from becoming severely ill. They spent more than the previous Liberal government before COVID-19 spending. And we have seen the largest deficit spending ever. They failed to reduce electricity rates. Rates have gone up. They failed our manufacturing sector with hundreds of thousands of jobs lost over the last 4 years. They betrayed parents by introducing the exact same sex ed curriculum that the Liberal government had introduced. Then they went further by voting in favor of Bill 67, which would have allowed for children to be fined for subconscious racism. The Ford PCs said they were going to scrap the per-vote taxpayer subsidy, but instead they increased how much each party received. The PCs used COVID-19 as an excuse to ram through emergency powers through Bill 100, which took the powers they gave themselves during the Ambassador Bridge and Trucker Convoy in February of 2022, and they made it into permanent law. The PCs are responsible for the job losses and loss of education that many Ontarians experienced because of the PC's own vaccine mandates, which they both implemented and encouraged. In Cambridge, the PCs wanted to allow for a mega warehouse to be built in the village of Blair without following their own rules on conducting community consultation. But I worked together with the community, and the MZO was rejected. I've also kept my promise to fight against a drug injection site in the city of Cambridge. And while every other provincial party and elected politician wants to push this through in Cambridge, I have fought to ensure that the voices of our community are heard. Because what we have seen time and time again is that the PC party, the Liberals, and the NDP, they're all the same. They agree on virtually every issue, and they are part of the problem. And that's why our platform, the New Blueprint, is the solution. I now introduce the leader of the New Blue Party of Ontario to formally introduce the New Blueprint, and he will be available for questions afterwards. Our candidates present here today will be happy to address any questions you may have, but will do so at a later time. So now, Jim Carhalios. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you for attending. Thank you for having us today. Belinda, my wife, it's an honor to call her my wife and be called her husband. She is an impossible act to follow, and she has led the way for the last 4 years since she was elected in Cambridge in 2018. She's led the way on matters of courage, conviction, and standing up for her constituents, standing on principle, and speaking out with her conscience when necessary. She is the New Blue Party of Ontario's first MPP, our first candidate, who said she would run again on the June 2nd election. And by her leading the way, we delivered and kept our commitment to run a candidate in each of Ontario's 124 ridings. We are the first party in Ontario to name 124 candidates, and we are the first party in Ontario to register 124 candidates, despite what some in the media may have claimed otherwise in their articles. We are really proud of the candidates we have running for the New Blue Party of Ontario, and today we have 11 candidates that have taken the time out of their day to join us, taken the time out of their campaigns to join us here. And I want to thank them for joining us. I'll introduce them briefly. Andrea Banier from Dufferin-Caledon is with us. Ivana Charneka, who is running in Newmarket, Aurora. Victor Ihikwe, who's running against Doug Ford in Etobicoke North. Angela Asher is running in Spadina, Fort York. Yehuda Goldberg is running in Toronto, St. Paul's. Danielle Height is running in Parkdale High Park. Jennifer Gowland is running in Markham Stouffville. Tristan Lackner is running in Whitby. Mark Morrissey is running in the riding of Mississauga East Cooksville. Thomas Hips is running in York South Weston. And Jennifer Gleason is running in Markham Thornhill. I want to thank these 11 candidates for joining us today, and thank all of the candidates across Ontario who've put their name forward for the New Blue Party on the ballot. They are backed by the volunteers and the members and the supporters of our party in every single riding, and we have been able to accomplish this in a short period of time in our first election as a political party. 124 candidates, one in every single riding. So thank you all for coming today and backing me up here as we unveil the platform, the new blueprint, and thank you for all your hard work in the last year and a half. So thank you for joining us. Thank you. Our platform is called the New Blueprint. And we didn't need any fancy lobbyists from Ontario, from Canada, or even failed lobbyists from south of the border to help us put it together. Our platform represents what the establishment parties don't want to discuss, and they do not want these problems to come up in the election campaign, for which we are offering solutions. Our party is made up of members and donors, riding presidents, board members of different New Blue Party ridings, and candidates from all walks of life. Just looking at our candidates, we have nurses, small business owners, stay-at-home mom and dads, those in law, geologists, former military, former police, teachers, pastors, consultants. An elected councillor is running, an elected trustee, and we had a former CFL player who joined us here today as well, from all walks of life. And the New Blueprint is the platform that we've put together that are the highlights of the most important issues that our Ontarians are looking for an alternative party to present solutions towards. Obviously, we are fighting constantly for local issues in terms of principle and in terms of what constituents want their elected representatives to fight for. Belinda has fought very diligently in Cambridge against the drug injection site. She's also held the Ford PCs to account in the village of Blair, where they've decided that cutting corners on the planning process is acceptable if the person requesting it has certain connections. And for the rest of this campaign and the future of the New Blue Party, we will be responsive to local issues. Our party platform are the solutions necessary for Ontario across the board, from every corner of this province, to provide a future of hope, opportunity, and prosperity. The New Blueprint obviously starts with commitments to change the course with regards to how the Ford PC government has handled lockdowns and mandates and their response to COVID-19. Belinda was the first MPP to vote against Doug Ford's lockdown bill, Bill 195, the only current or former PC MPP to do so, and the only politician in Canada to vote against her own government's, a piece of legislation from her own government related to lockdowns or COVID mandates. And so obviously the new blueprint starts there. We are committing to a complete repeal of Doug Ford's emergency measures. And that is whether it was disguised as a response to COVID or not. Since early last summer, we've advocated for a ban on the use of COVID-19 vaccine passports and looking at legislation and fines to do that, whether it's in the public or the private sector. Now, some say that it should just be left as an option for facility operators. That's the position that the Ford PCs are now taking as they've backtracked from their initial advocacy in favor of vaccine passports. But they created the problem, and it persists, even with a change of rhetoric from them. And the Liberals and the NDP continue to push it. We need legislation and fines to ban their use. We also need a complete review and a reduction in the powers of local bureaucrats. Many of those local bureaucrats have taken positions to shut down businesses, things that are way over their head. They may be experts in something called public health, but they should not have complete control over the lives and businesses of Ontarians across this province. Included in a complete repeal in the emergencies measures that Doug Ford has put down is obviously repealing Bill 100 that was put in place just at the end of the legislative session. Belinda was the first MPP at second reading to debate against that bill. She was joined by 3 other MPPs who voted against that bill at second reading, and they raised awareness. And that bill, Bill 100, was passed in the middle of the night outside of regular legislative sitting hours. And then finally, we're the only party calling for restitution for those harmed by the application of emergency measures by Justin Trudeau or Doug Ford, and that includes those truckers who had their businesses shut down without due process. Now, there are many that just want us to stop there. Don't talk about anything else in this campaign. Lockdown and mandates. And obviously the Ford PCs have been prepared to enter into this campaign with some opposition figures out there just talking about lockdowns and mandates. And they want to escape the rest of this campaign without scrutiny for everything that they have implemented under the guise of COVID, while perhaps we were all preoccupied with COVID-related legislation and measures. And in the Ford PC strategy is to run away from their record and say, oh, the last 4 years didn't really matter. We didn't really mean it. Oftentimes, Premier likes to say he was powerless in implementing these measures or shifting the blame to the federal government, who he is in complete simpatico with. But our new blueprint has 6 other areas to hold the Ford PCs and the establishment parties to account, to talk about the things that they don't like us talking about, because our commitment has always been to challenge the left, balance the narrative, and change the course of politics in Ontario and in Canada. It starts with renewing political accountability, and there are 3 commitments under that. It's been well documented over the last 4 years and beyond that the lobbyists rule the roost at Queen's Park. The Ford government promised in their campaign in 2018 that they were not for the elites, that they were going to bring back accountability. They did the opposite. Under the PC government, it's been well reported that lobbyists join caucus calls and tell the elected members how to vote. And it's really interesting because some of those same lobbyists were members of the Stephen Harper Conservative government federally who brought in legislation to bring accountability back. The Ontario provincial rules are a lot weaker on lobbyists than the federal government rules. We need to bring some of those ideas from the Federal Accountability Act that Stephen Harper brought in place, apply them to provincial politics in Ontario and go beyond there. And we need to ban lobbyists from partaking in internal party politics. They've got to pick one or the other. We can't have lobbyists recommending to leaders of parties who they should appoint or monkeying around in internal party elections if the establishment parties ever decide to bring those back for them. I know we continue to have internal party elections. The second commitment is to crack down on voter fraud in internal party elections. Belinda brought her first private members bill forward in 2019, a historic piece of legislation that would have made voter fraud in internal party elections illegal for the first time in Ontario or even Canadian history. And the Ford PCs made sure that that bill never came out of committee and died on the legislative table. We've got to bring that bill back and make it law. And finally, in renewing political accountability, the Ford PCs promised they were going to scrap the taxpayer subsidy of political parties. They brought it back and they increased it by 40%. Every year, the Ford PC party gets $5.9 million taxpayer money to run their political operations. Over the last 10 years, the establishment parties at Queen's Park have taken over $100 million in taxpayer money to fund their political operations. Political parties should survive on the contributions from their supporters and donors. There are generous tax credits under the law that have always existed for donors to political parties. The taxpayer subsidy of political parties is egregious and unnecessary, and we're going to keep fighting to scrap the $100 million taxpayer subsidy of the establishment of political parties. We are the only party promoting a free press and talking about defunding the establishment media. Now, many would say that's a federal issue. It has nothing to do with provincial politics, but Doug Ford, in his commitment to make sure he's good buddies with Justin Trudeau and completing the transformation of the Ontario PC Party into the wing, provincial wing, of the Justin Trudeau Federal Liberal Party of Canada, he's found other ways to fund the establishment media. Not only does he have nothing to say about the Trudeau government continuing to hand over taxpayer money to establishment media outlets to fund their operations, Doug Ford's figured out another way to do it at the provincial level. Our solution is twofold. First, a provincial tax should be applied on corporate media that receive any of Justin Trudeau's federal government taxpayer bailout subsidy. At the time that we drafted the new blueprint, it was at $600 million, and it continues to increase. That money should be used for tax relief or providing essential services to Ontarians. Number two is the Toronto Star. Toronto Star was having trouble a couple of years ago. There was speculation they were going bankrupt. They were bought out by a private equity firm that took them off the market, the stock market that is, and they said they were going to have another plan to fund their operations. And lo and behold, over a year ago, they came forward and they revealed their big plan. They announced they were going to be the first to get into the online gambling business. After Justin Trudeau made online gambling legal, it was the Ford PC government's responsibility to hand out those licenses. And the Ford PCs thought it was appropriate to grant the Toronto Star an online gambling license. Why a Ford PC government would do that for the Toronto Star is something that I can't answer today. I can only speculate. But not only did they do that, Ford PC government turned to the Liberal lobbyist who was representing the Toronto Star, who used to work for the Dalton McGuinty Liberal government and made him the head of the Ontario Lottery and Gaming Commission. Because the establishment parties are all in it together at Queen's Park. Well, there are criticisms from the left and the right about a source of media like the Toronto Star getting its funding through online gambling. It's not just a right of center or a conservative opinion. It should not mix revenues from online gambling and media. And we are the party that's going to commit to canceling the Toronto Star's online gambling license. And they have to figure out that if they want to stay in business, they got to start writing stuff that people want to read. We have other commitments in the new blueprint. The Ford PCs for so long, they would say they were the party that was fiscally responsible. They were the best managers of an economy. But under their government, we've seen them tank the economy like no prior government before them. Manufacturing jobs have gone down under the Ford PC government. Even their own projections of annual growth for the economy are pitiful. They are not the managers of the economy. They are merely those who have extended the policies that have destroyed Ontario's economy from the Liberal government that preceded them. The New Blue Party has to be the party that pushes the ideas forward to grow Ontario's economy going forward at 5% annually and even better. The only way to do that is threefold. The regulatory burden has to be slashed in Ontario, not just trimmed. Number two, we need to increase and improve Ontario's productivity. For many, many years, when we were the economic engine of Confederation, Ontario was a leader on productivity. And now we are a lagger. But none of that can happen until we get our electricity rates down to a reasonable level again. The Ford PCs said they were going to reduce electricity rates. They broke their promise. And now we've got electricity rates increasing and taxpayer subsidization of electricity rates. The only way to reduce those electricity rates is to take down the wind turbines that provide no benefit and at least a quarter of the cost of electricity rates. The Ford PCs said they were against the expansion of wind turbines. But under their watch, they're putting the largest wind farm in Ontario's history up. Now, for a long time, the establishment class in the PC party, I attended some of those debates. When they were pressed on wind turbines, they would say, you can't do that. You can't take down the wind turbines. What kind of message would that send to the business community? But we saw under the guise of COVID, when they wanted the power to shut down mom and pop businesses, there was nothing stopping them. Not even the desperation from moms and dads across Ontario and families whose businesses were going bankrupt. If the Ontario legislature has the power to shut down businesses for COVID, then they have the power to take down the wind turbines and end the banana republic that is the wind electricity system in this province. And that's what the New Blue Party is going to do and keep fighting for. That is how we will improve Ontario's economy, by ending that banana republic ripoff, getting our electricity rates to come down to reasonable levels, and then we can slash the regulatory burden, improve productivity, and not only bring jobs back, but grow jobs in Ontario and our economy better than it ever was before. There is no establishment party talking about tax relief for Ontarians. It's another thing that the PC party used to talk about, to at least show one thing that separated them from the Liberals and NDP. But after 4 years in power, they haven't offered any tax relief. In fact, they've increased taxes. Doug Ford promised that he was going to axe the carbon tax. Campaign I started in 2017. I was flattered. Good for him. He went through and he canceled cap and trade. We had hope for about 5 minutes in a Ford PC government when he did that. But now in Ontario, we have 2 carbon taxes, not just one. Before the Supreme Court ruled on the challenge, Doug Ford went ahead and cut a deal with Justin Trudeau, got the approval from Justin, laid out the red carpet for Justin Trudeau's carbon tax, and Doug Ford put in an industrial carbon tax in Ontario. So now we've got 2 carbon taxes in Ontario. We've got Doug Ford's industrial carbon tax, and we've got Justin Trudeau's consumer carbon tax from the federal level. And that's what the Ford PCs thought axing the carbon tax was, 2 carbon taxes instead of 1. That has increased costs and made life more unaffordable in Ontario, because we all know that producers, when a tax is applied, pass that cost down to consumers. We are going to continue to fight the axe the carbon tax, and that starts with scrapping Doug Ford's industrial carbon tax. I will say 2 more things on that carbon tax pledge. Ford PCs said they tried their best in court to fight the carbon tax and they lost. Not true. I had an op-ed that I wrote that appeared in the National Post. They threw that court case when they conceded 2 of the 3 legal arguments. Number 2, it is critical that provincial parties continue to fight the carbon tax at the provincial level. Because if we're ever going to get rid of the carbon tax, we can't have a patchwork system of carbon taxes at the provincial and federal level. Hopefully we'll have a government one day that replaces Justin Trudeau that gets rid of the federal carbon tax. But if we don't have a provincial party that does it in Ontario, we'll always have Doug Ford's industrial carbon tax. For a long time, the establishment parties in Ontario talked about tax relief, but only when it came to corporations. 0.25% here, 0.5% there, depending on the lobbyists that some of these businesses hired. Tax relief has to be focused on the individual. And that's why in the new blueprint, we're committing to a 3 percentage point cut in the HST from 13% to 10%. But we're not just stopping there on democratic reform, on holding the establishment media to account, and on the economy. Our new blueprint includes promises on education and healthcare. On healthcare, we were the politicians and the party to talk about the fact that early treatment for COVID-19 only became available months after lockdowns and mandates were introduced. Thanks to Belinda, who did her homework, we discovered that monoclonal antibody treatment was available in Hamilton. The fact that the Ontario government has not ensured that this is not widely available and promoted for those who get COVID-19 is nefarious. That's why we are committing to expanding early treatment of COVID-19. We also have to clear the backlog of procedures that have taken place in our healthcare system as a result of the lockdowns and mandates for the last year and a half. I'm in the healthcare system every 3 months for constant checkups to make sure that my recovery stays on course. And oftentimes I meet people there that share their stories of waiting far too long for critical procedures, and it's not right. We will be the party that pushes for clearing the backlog of procedures and offering choice in the healthcare system when the healthcare system is, quite frankly, not being responsive. And finally, as we've always committed to, we will fight for the nurses to be rehired who lost their jobs, resulting in staffing shortages in our healthcare system. Finally, on education. Belinda held the Ford PC government to account when they voted in favor of that terrible Bill 67. When everyone else caved or ran for cover Belinda had the courage to stand up one more time on her own and vote no. That bill looked to infuse critical race theory from the provincial level on every single school board in this province. 2 weeks later, Belinda got the Ford PC government to reverse course, even after they were on the record enthusiastically applauding the elements of the bill. The junior minister of education, or I guess I'm in an official setting here, so I'll use the official term, the parliamentary assistant for the minister of education, he said it was a great bill, Bill 67. How can a Ford PC government say that a bill that wants to fine students and others in the educational system for subconscious racism, say that's a great idea? It baffles the mind how far left and out of touch this PC party has become. But thanks to Belinda, Bill 67 did not become law, and the Ford PC government reversed course. But critical race theory is still being introduced at different school boards across Ontario. At the provincial level, we don't need an infusion of critical race theory. We need to ban critical race theory from our schools. And woke ideology and woke activism. That also includes gender identity theory. Belinda stood tall on the last day of the legislature and read a petition signed by thousands of parents and others across Ontario calling for just that. And the New Blue Party, we always keep our commitments. We will keep our commitment to stop woke activism in our schools. But for many parents, they can't wait for the public education system to become more responsive, for the money spent in public education to be focused on frontline services. They can't wait for a reduction in administrative costs. They've made alternative schooling decisions, and others are desperate to do so. Learning pods, homeschooling, private school have all become options for more and more parents. We need alternative schooling tax credits in Ontario. It's about time, and we will continue to advocate for that. As the campaign unfolds, I'm sure there'll be other issues and matters that come forward. The spin doctors and their friends in the media will do their best to drive the agenda. But we have a new blueprint and a party platform that covers every aspect of the lives of Ontario voters. And we have a team of 124 candidates, and they're riding presidents and members and donors and volunteers on the ground with literature outlining our new blueprint and our promises. And the signs have already gone up. We've worked hard in the last year and a half, despite the setbacks, to make sure we were ready on day one of the campaign. And there's no shortcuts for us. We know that. What we're doing is unprecedented. But we know that with every step we take, momentum will build. And we also know that the more Ontarians hear about the New Blue Party, they like what they hear. So we're going to keep pushing forward to ensure we challenge the left, balance the narrative, and change the course, to lead on fiscal issues, social issues, democratic issues, as we have since we started the Axe the Carbon Tax campaign, fought voter fraud, stood up against Doug Ford's lockdown bill, stood up against critical race theory, and stood up against cronyism. We've always led, and we will continue to lead the course and set the path in Ontario. And that's our commitment, because we always ensure we keep our commitment. So thank you for joining me and giving me the opportunity to present our party platform, one that will ensure strength, stability, liberty, and good government for Ontario for a long time. Thank you, everybody. Thanks. Are there any questions?
Jim, you sort of made mention of the Ontario Party's hiring of Roger Stone. Can you tell me a little bit about what you think of that?
Well, it's par for the course for Derek Sloan. Number one, he doesn't keep his commitments. Just recently he said a couple weeks ago when he was looking for donations, give me $1 million, he said he wasn't going to run a candidate against Belinda. Made that promise to his readers. And now he's desperately saying he's trying to find candidates in 124 ridings. I also find it interesting that he's hired Roger Stone, because here's a guy in his career as a lobbyist in the Republican Party. He was one of the figures who said the Republican Party should be less pro-life and more pro-abortion. Roger Stone is called, what are some of the phrases? Like a dirty trickster in politics, right? And here's a guy like Derek Sloan who comes forward and says he's a man of Christian integrity, right? High principles, this Derek Sloan. Always tells the truth. And he's partnered up with Roger Stone, who's been hostile in his career to pro-life Republicans and who's well known for doing dirty tricks. So Derek Sloan likes to say that I do smear campaigns, but he went south of the border to hire the guy who's built his career on smear campaigns. Roger Stone got fired by Donald Trump because the script's run out for Roger Stone. And he's trying to revive his career here, and he sees a guy in Derek Sloan who doesn't have any principles, doesn't keep his commitments, and isn't a fighter. And Derek Sloan's got a nice list there he got from the Conservative Party of Canada, where he asks people for $1 million in donations, and I'm sure Roger Stone is eager to get a slice.
Are you worried at all that like having someone like Stone is going to attract people who might be otherwise drawn to your party and its message? Is like having that kind of, Trump era celebrity going to be a draw for the Ontario Party, do you think?
I don't see it as a draw. I mean, look, if Derek Sloan was in it for the cause and he wasn't creating confusion, I wouldn't be spending as much time answering media questions about this, right? We could be focusing on the new blueprint and the new blue party. But the people behind Derek Sloan did this for a reason, so that the media will bite and they will make it look like there are two alternative parties to the Ford PCs, when in fact they're not, because the people behind Derek Sloan are PC apologists that are threatened by the new blue party. I saw some of them in pictures. Did you notice this weekend there was the Manning Center had their conference? They've changed the name, Canada Strong and Free Network. You didn't notice that? So they got this annual thing in Ottawa that they do, a big soiree. All the establishment conservatives come in, they sip cocktails, they shake hands. They say, oh, we're all on the same team. Some of the Sloan people were there at that soiree. So on the one hand, they fight that they say they're against the establishment. On the other hand, they like to get together with the establishment for drinks. So it does distract from our message, obviously. The media is going to bite on it. Roger Stone hasn't been very effective. I don't think he understands Ontario politics. We would have been farther ahead if Derek Sloan didn't do what he's doing. And we can't really control what they're doing, but we can expose their voting record, the fact that they don't know what they're doing and they don't know what they stand up for, and whether he's going to get Roger Stone or lobbyists from here to help him out. We know Derek Sloan is not the person that comes up with the ideas for the Ontario Party. People that rule and run the Ontario Party are never going to be disclosed to us. And all we can do is focus on moving forward every day like we have since 2016, 2017.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the platform then. You want to take down windmills. You just earlier you were saying that it was unjust for public health officials to tell businesses what to do, and then you say, well, if they did it anyway, let's take down windmills. Do you not see that as hypocritical? Because someone else did something that you didn't think was right, that it gives you permission to do the same thing?
I think you're comparing two different things. They're not analogous at all. Local bureaucrats are designed to work in public health. Public health should not have the power to trump and shut down businesses in an area of expertise they know nothing about. The wind turbine question, wind turbines in Ontario have turned our electricity grid into a banana republic. It's a total ripoff. There is no benefit to wind turbines in Ontario. They've driven the rate of electricity up. Most of the electricity they produce is overflow that gets dumped into the U.S. for pennies on the dollar, or we pay them to take it because it's often produced in off-peak periods. And so there's a couple things that have been well researched. On the legal side, the legislature has the authority to pass legislation to get out of those contracts. It's a simple basic principle of parliamentary supremacy, which is no current government can bind future governments with legislation that says they have to follow the same path. That's never been tried before in terms of the wind turbine question. The power plant scandal with McGuinty, he didn't pass legislation to cancel the power plant. He tried to do it under the table with the signature of a ministerial order, which is why the penalty kicked in. So we can pass legislation to end those turbines. We can compensate the farmers in rehabilitating their land. We can dispose of these turbines, and we'll still come out way ahead than having to pay the rates for the next 10 or 20 years or whatever's left on those contracts. So it is necessary to bring down electricity rates and get our economy improving. It's the only way to do it.
Would you be in favor of restitution for other protesters who defy legal orders to leave in any other circumstances other than the trucker convoy?
Well, I have to look at it. It depends on if the law is applied fairly across the board or if it's made up on a stroke of a pen and applied differently to different people. But we are the only ones fighting for restitution for those that are harmed by state of emergency measures that are put in place.
Is this measure about intra-party election making it illegal? Is that something that you want after your own experience with the in the federal conservative race?
I appreciate that you asked it in that way as opposed to just saying I'm self-interested in it, which someone in the Waterloo Record wrote when Belinda tabled the bill. She tables the bill and we thought the media was going to say, what a great bill. Here it is. She found a patch in the law. There's no law against voter fraud. The media is all excited about counting every nickel and dime that goes on in internal party elections, money raised, money spent, and yet no one cared. And we had this op-ed writer in the Waterloo Record who just attacked us that it was based on self-interest. Now, I was the guy standing up against voter fraud way before I was even on the ballot. This was in 2017. I didn't even know the people that were getting rigged out of elections and nominations. It just turned my stomach to see that I was living in a place where voter fraud was allowed to go forward and it was called inside baseball or not a big deal. Obviously, when you see it up close and personal at a PC convention and you have over 1,000 people who've paid hundreds of dollars, it hits you pretty hard, right? And I explored all the avenues and I know it very well. You call Elections Ontario, you call the police, they can't do anything about it. Now, a law like that would not be retroactive, so it doesn't do me any good backwards. It's not going to be applied for things that have already happened in the past. Secondly, I don't even think the PCs or the Liberals or the NDP care anymore because I don't know if you've noticed, the PCs solved the voter fraud problem in their party. They don't even have nomination elections anymore. They don't have a convention. They're supposed to have one every 2 years. They don't do that because Brian Patterson wants to be the president for life, I guess. But I think it's necessary to get a law on the books as step one in rehabilitating the democratic process in internal party politics. We had 3 nominations. We were happy about that. They went smoothly. But there has to be something on the books that says in our democracy, voter fraud is not allowed to happen in internal party elections. And if you're a victim, there's somewhere you can turn to.
Clearly you have a good large slate of candidates, and so you probably stand to get quite a few votes this election. Whether you win any seats or not, I don't know. But are you going to commit to returning any per vote subsidy you get? Will you not touch it at all, even though you might need that money to build the party?
Thank you for saying that I'm going to get it. Like, we are happy at how far ahead we are at this stage. And we'll see if we get to the level. I don't even know what the level is that you have to hit to get the per vote subsidy. But we are going to fight that all political parties that get the per vote subsidy return it and scrap it. That's our fight, and that's our going forward. We are at a significant disadvantage against the establishment parties who've got millions of dollars to fund their operations. And it'll be very early on whether, regardless of how many MPs we have to push and get them to scrap the bill.
Can you give me a clear, a concise definition of what critical race theory is?
Critical race theory is a political ideology that says that liberalism and classical liberalism, as we have known it, is infused with systemic racism. and it advocates for exploring all institutions in our society for systemic racism or racism that, as it says in that bill, is subconscious. Is that pretty good?
Go to the phone line now.
Okay, on the phone.
Please press star 1 to get in the teleconference queue. And your question will be from Kate Burkert at CBC. Please go ahead.
Hi, Jim, could you go over your platform again? Sorry, I missed it, about affordable housing, what you'll do to ensure people can afford housing and people on lower incomes as well.
Great question, Kate. Affordable housing is, the solutions to it are all throughout the new blueprint, Kate. And there's 3 different aspects on affordable housing. Number 1, we don't have enough supply of housing in Ontario. And that starts with reducing and slashing the regulatory burden for new builds and making it consistent across the board. Number 2, we've got to bring down costs, and whether it's electricity rates or reducing the HST or the industrial carbon tax, getting rid of the industrial carbon tax, or other forms of tax relief, that all has to be back on the table in the political discourse in Ontario for people to be able to afford housing, and also to bring down the cost of housing in not only allowing new builds to go forward, but also ensuring that they are done as cost efficient as possible.
You're running in Kitchener-Conestoga. I'm wondering what your top issue is specifically for your riding and for Waterloo Region.
For Waterloo Region, it's very similar what we've been hearing across Ontario in every riding. And we don't like to play, slice and dice the riding up into different geographies, wedging people against one another. But what we've been hearing is Kitchener-Conestoga residents want someone at Queen's Park that is going to represent them and not be the messenger of the establishment in Kitchener-Conestoga, which the current MPP has done a pretty good job of. Whether it's standing up against a drug injection site in Cambridge, standing up when zoning orders and their corners are cut in the planning process, or even in Kitchener-Conestoga, standing up for Trinity Bible Chapel. Kitchener-Conestoga residents have said, wouldn't it be great to have someone like Belinda be their MPP? I can't do as good of a job as Belinda did, and she's running in Cambridge, so they've got the next best thing, Jim Carahalios, on the ballot.
Next question will be from David Lee at Oakville Beaver.
Hi there. Thanks so much for taking my question. My question is, in the event a new blue government is elected, how would you deal with a scenario where COVID numbers are going up and the Chief Medical Officer of Health is recommending a return to, say, mask mandates, vaccine passports, school closures, and whatnot?
Very clear in the new blueprint. So after all the lockdown measures and the mandates, you basically identified it for me. COVID hasn't gone away. Remember that myth of COVID zero, we were told? There's no such thing as COVID zero. And so we've got to focus on expanding early treatment. I had a young mom call me from East York during this process. And I had the unfortunate situation of taking her call as she was in tears because her mom fell into a coma and she heard us on the radio talking about early treatment. She couldn't get access to it. And by the time she knew to ask for it, it was too late. Her mom was in a coma. I had another mom in Peterborough thank us for raising awareness of the fact that the authorities threatened to call child services, the police did, because she refused to put a mask on her child in a park outside. No one in Ontario believes that either one of those things is acceptable. It's not fringe to call this stuff out. We're not in the minority. And the proper way to deal with COVID is to expand and make readily available early treatment, regardless of comorbidities or age or anything like that.
Follow up?
Thank you. Nope, that's it.
Thanks.
No other questions from the teleconference.
Well, thank you, everybody, for joining, and thank you for giving us the opportunity. I think we've done something unprecedented, getting 124 candidates registered at the start of the campaign in our first election campaign. I know Steve Paikin at TVO, when he interviewed us a couple years ago, asked us, where are you going to find the people? Well, we found the people. We didn't have any lobbyists to do so, and we're looking forward to the rest of the campaign up until June 2nd and beyond, because we're going to do this for the long term. So thank you for having us. Thank you for joining us.